Welcome to Bite Size Learning. I'm so excited to share our 11th video in a series inspired by Peter Liljedahl's Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics. Remember, you can access the previous videos on our website. Peter Liljedahl's book, Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics, has shifted the thinking of many educators in mathematics and beyond around how institutional norms in education have encouraged the creation of studenting behaviors that often interfere with student thinking and learning. Over 15 years of research, Liljedahl identified 14 factors where he in essence turned institutional norms on their head to see how student thinking would be impacted. He ultimately refined his research into what he calls optimal practices that promote thinking. And those are what Jill and I are exploring over this series of bite-sized learning videos. Today, we're going to explore how we take notes in a thinking classroom.
Thinking back to my own school days, I remember sitting and taking lots of notes. I remember rushing to write every word from the chalkboard or the overhead. I remember copying equations, definitions, and more. I also remember that I never looked back at them until it was time to prepare for a test. As I reflect now, I wonder how much of what I recorded I actually understood. I also wonder how the notes and the note-taking enhanced my learning. Liljedahl tells us that taking notes is the most enduring institutional norm in the mathematics classroom worldwide. And if we look around other subject areas and other classrooms, it's clear that this is an institutional norm in all of education. But there are problems with the way traditional note-taking happens. Students are trying to keep up with the teacher's thinking, and this requires a huge cognitive load. And as a result, students fall behind in the note-taking. They stop listening, or they're unable to make sense of what they are writing. It becomes a mindless and meaningless activity. It's essentially the antithesis of thinking. Well, there are problems with traditional note-taking. We know that students need notes for their future reference. Therefore, not requiring students to take notes doesn't work either, because when students are not required to take notes, they don't voluntarily take them because they don't find it interesting. They're not sure what information they need to record. They know they could find the information elsewhere, or they just think they'll remember it.
So how do we incorporate note-taking in a thinking classroom? We ask students to create meaningful notes. Now, what does that mean? Let's look at some details. Liljedahl offers this strategy of having students record meaningful notes. These notes focus on student autonomy and brevity. They focus on students writing ideas down for their future forgetful selves, the things they'll need and want to remember 3 weeks from now. He encourages the use of graphic organizers to help students develop the skill of note-taking, and recognizes that educators need to support students in how to take notes. They won't necessarily have developed this independent skill if they've been in classes where teachers expect them to record things word for word from a slide deck or the board. Additionally, there are 3 competencies that students need to develop in order to record their own meaningful notes. First of all, creation. They need to have a worked example that they have produced. Next, annotation, using small phrases and side examples as signposts on the journey through their worked example or the problem that they have solved. Finally, selection. Students need support in recognizing how to choose an appropriate question to form the basis of their worked example to cue their memories 3 weeks into the future. So in summary, have students write meaningful notes. Emphasize that they are the creators and the audience. This is for them and by them. Allow students to work together to create the notes and emphasize that need for some examples to anchor their memory. As well, make sure to have students revisit and use the notes in an active learning experience at a later date. This will help students understand what was important to record and give them some immediate feedback on how they might need to adjust their note-taking in the future. So once again, these notes should be by students and for students and are an opportunity for students to individually consolidate the learning that they experienced in their collaborative groups while working at the vertical non-permanent surfaces. Next, Jill is going to offer us some examples of what this might look like in your curricular area.
In every curricular area, we can implement meaningful notes. When implementing this strategy, we first want to ensure that we model and teach students how to take notes. Showing different organizers and different ways to take notes will help the students to make the choice on how is best for them to take their notes. We can also communicate to students that the format of the notes may differ for the purpose. Essentially, students can collaborate and write what is meaningful to them in the format of their choice. One form of note-taking that can allow students to record their learning is sketch notes. These visual notes combine text, visuals, and colors to help students make meaning. This is a wonderful way to take notes on a reading or in response to a media piece or at the end of a section of learning. Sketch notes are also referred to as visual note-taking. Visual note-taking can be done as we listen or view a lesson. A few key features to keep in mind is the use of lettering for emphasis, organization of ideas through the use of arrows and lines, and the use of color to show thinking and group ideas. Mind mapping is also a wonderful visual tool to show how ideas throughout a lesson are connected and for students to build their understanding. Cornell notes are a highly structured form of note-taking and a template that we can use in our classrooms. In the center, the students record notes, examples, sample problems, and solutions. Along the left-hand side, they record their thinking, which could be key ideas, key words, annotations, as Liliadol suggests. And on the bottom, they summarize their learning in their own words in one sentence. A KWL chart is a way that we can bridge pre and post learning through notes. On the what I know and what I want to know, students record their thinking prior to the learning, and after the learning, they record what they learned. 3-2-1 notes are a great way for students to summarize their understanding of a lesson, and how we categorize those can vary. We can have, 3 things I learned, 2 questions I have, and 1 picture of what I've learned, so that students can show their learning in a variety of ways. When learning new vocabulary, we want to keep track of that new vocabulary and have a place to record it. So in this template here, we can see that the students record the new word. They can record it in their first language if they're learning a new language like English or French. They can define it, and then they can add a visual or a sentence to help them consolidate that use of that new word. Another great way to learn new vocabulary or new concepts is through using a Freyer model. In the center, the word is put there, so that new vocabulary. Then students put the definition in their own words. They include examples of what that is and what it isn't, and then facts and characteristics to go along with it. So again, students can choose to use this form of note-taking to consolidate their learning, and it's particularly helpful with new vocabulary. And one final example is annotating a piece of reading, because we sometimes ask our students to take notes not just from a lecture or a activity, but from a piece of reading. So here we see that students can take notes from a reading or passage via annotation, where they write down questions they have, wonderings they have, inferences they've made, and this can be done collaboratively or on their own. We encourage you to try different ways of note-taking with your students. Have them make meaningful notes with them in the driver's seat of what is recorded. I'd like for you to consider, how might you create opportunities for students to take meaningful notes in your subject area? If you give this a try, please share with us. Thank you for joining us today. Next week, we're going to dig into what we choose to evaluate in a thinking classroom.